Hey, I really don't know what's going on with you, but I just want to just give you a heads up that I'm about to really disappear on you. You feel me?
Diddy accuser Jane has taken the stand, and so far, not entirely clear on what to make of her testimony. It seems she helps the prosecution's case at times, and at others, maybe hurting it. Let's break down some of the top moments for you right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. All right, let's talk about Jane. So this is alleged victim number 2 in the indictment in the Sean Combs case, still testifying, by the way, at the time of this recording. So arguably the second most important witness so far in Sean Combs' criminal trial. It seems prosecutors hope that her testimony will support transportation to engage in prostitution, sex trafficking, and the racketeering charges. But here are the questions. What were the strengths of her testimony? What's going to help the prosecution? But also, what were the weaknesses? In other words, what can the defense use to their advantage? I want to talk about it. And to be clear, she's still testifying, okay? So this is a breakdown of what we've heard so far. Everything could change as she continues her testimony. But for this, let me bring on criminal law attorney, former prosecutor Melba Pearson to talk more about this. Melba, so good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Great to be with you again, Jesse.
Generally speaking, before we get into the specifics, how do you think Jane is coming off so far?
So let's be very clear. I believe survivors, all of that. And she did have some very, very heartbreaking aspects to her story. She kind of gives a mixed bag. So in some ways, she substantiates and bolsters the credibility of some of the other witnesses that have testified. She's definitely kind of reinforced the dark aspects of being in Diddy's world and all of the awful things that he does to people, and is clearly not a one-off, right? Because of the fact that she talked about so many different horrible things that she had to endure. But on the flip side, I think there's some questions about her credibility, not in terms of did this happen, but how much of this was coercion and how much of this was her choosing to stay for a better lifestyle. And again, I mean, these types of cases are very complicated. And, you know, when you think about domestic violence, a lot of people don't think about, emotional abuse. They don't think about financial abuse and things like that. But again, there's some of her testimony did smack me wrong. So I don't, it's going to be a mixed bag.
Let me tell you this. What you just outlined is kind of what I have been wondering myself, and wondering if the prosecution needed her for this case. But let me explain where I think she actually has done well for the prosecution. I'm going to get to sex trafficking in a little, but I got to say, I think she is really helping to prove transportation to engage in prostitution, that charge. And she makes up one of the specific charges. I think it's count 5 in the indictment. By the way, this carries up to 10 years in prison, so it's a serious federal charge. But it is literally the accusation that Combs allegedly transported sex workers and Jane in interstate and foreign commerce on multiple occasions with the intent that they engage in prostitution. I don't believe there is a force, fraud, or coercion element that's necessary. It's basically transporting people for sex work, okay? Here's a little bit of a back and forth from the transcript from last week. Question: about how many of those times that you saw Sean in person between May of 2021 and October of 2023 did you end up having a hotel night? Which, in other words, is kind of like these debauchery nights. They're similar to the freak-off nights, okay. Answer: every single time I saw Sean. Okay, so she testified that Combs would arrange her travel. This was through assistance, that he paid for it, that she saw Combs hand cash to the male performers. She also testified that his security or assistants, like his purported chief of staff, Christina Coram, would give him cash. She testified that she helped to pick the performers, even arranged the flights of at least one male performer from Atlanta to New York. And she allegedly paid him $2,000 to $4,000. She claims she got the money from Combs. She testified how Combs arranged performers to come over too. She testified that the assistants had set up the rooms. So Melba, from this charge alone, do you think her testimony supports that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I say it's a mixed bag, because she definitely did give some things to the prosecution in terms of showing that she was flying all over the country to engage in these freak off / hotel nights, that it was at Diddy's request and direction, that again, that this wasn't something, even though coerciveness and fraud and force are not necessarily required. Again, when you look at it in the totality of the circumstances, sum and substance, nobody wanted to be there, right? The performers were there because they were paid. The women were there because they were in a relationship in some way, shape, or form with Diddy and thought that they were in a loving relationship, and it turns out they were really being abused. So I think it adds a lot to the general context as well as substantiating each of these charges. So for sure, she gives the prosecution that.
Well, Melba, if she's testifying about how she helped arrange hotel nights as a surprise for Sean, that was a part of her testimony, I believe, can he say, hey, listen, I wasn't a part of all this? Or even if he agreed, is it still prostitution? You know, there was an argument that I'm paying these people for their time and experience, and maybe they could say I had them come over to dance and perform, and then one thing led to another. Or is this, again, I still feel like this is the most straightforward charge, but is there a way for him to even wiggle out of this?
No. No, money for sex equals prostitution. And there's no other way around it. And if you're paying these workers, whether it's him doing it directly, whether it's him having an intermediary do it, you're still directing it, right? So at the end of the day, money for sex equals prostitution. He can't get around that. There's nothing he can do.
Let me ask you this. Aside from the men getting paid, right? If she, and this is what she testified to, that she got her rent paid by Sean Combs, that he was giving her gifts like a love bracelet, that he was giving her cash. Is she the commercial aspect? Is she getting paid and flown around for sex work?
Realistically, yes. But the flip side of it is that I don't think she went into it with that arrangement in mind. So in her mind, she thought she was in a relationship. In his mind, I mean, who can really tell if it was a relationship or he was using her as a sex worker or a hybrid thereof? But it's not that straightforward that, okay, we're having a commercial transaction, you and I, you give me money, I give you XYZ in return. It didn't seem to be that kind of relationship. She talked about, I was in love with him and we had all these beautiful nights together, and I got upset when he was flying some other woman around on a private jet and wouldn't take me to the Turks and Caicos, that sort of thing. So to me, that takes away the commercial sex work aspect as in terms of intentionality. She did not intend to be a sex worker. That's not what she came to the table to do. She thought she was getting a boyfriend.
Okay, now let me move on to the most controversial charge, sex trafficking. Force, fraud, coercion. Force, fraud, coercion to induce Jane into performing commercial sex acts. That's the allegation. This is the mixed bag, even more so that I think you're talking about. So the travel component could arguably be established if this all happened in all different places, but it's really about the non-consensual aspect. She testified how Combs was dismissive of her request that the men wear condoms, and how he even became upset that she was afraid of speaking up because he would become agitated. She testified that on at least one occasion when she was exhausted because of these allegedly prolonged sex sessions, hours upon hours, Combs allegedly said to her, "You're not getting tired on me, are you?" And something along the lines of, "Let's finish strong," or "Let's end on a high note." She claimed that after she threw up in one session, he allegedly said to her, "That's good. You'll feel better now that you've thrown up, so let's go." And then she was allegedly directed to have sex with a third man that time. That he allegedly got disgusted at her for crying. That when she tried to speed things up with the other men, in an effort to, what she says, basically get it over with, he would tell her to slow things down. She testified that she told Combs that she didn't want to engage in this in certain ways, including through text messages. She apparently wrote to him how the debauchery or hotel nights were, quote, "the only reason you have me around and pay for the house," and that she was doing things that make me disgusted with myself. I don't want to keep feeling like that. And she encouraged him that they should talk like adults and figure out where we're going from here. "I don't want to feel obligated to perform these nights for you." Combs apparently replied at one point, "Girl, stop." There were more sexually explicit messages where she complained how she's only being used to perform certain sex acts on other men. She also claims Combs gave her drugs like ecstasy to keep her awake for these sex sessions, although I think there is a question whether it was voluntarily taken or not. And you wonder if the acts themselves, right, sex acts with other men, one even apparently lasting 3.5 days, the jury could be saying, how on earth could all of this really be consensual? Melba, I'll get to the weaknesses or the potential weaknesses in her testimony. That alone, and if there's anything I miss, please add, but that alone, is that force, fraud, coercion?
The argument can be made that it is, on top of the fact that he is paying her bills and made it very clear. I believe in one part of the testimony, he allegedly said something along the lines of, I'm on my job, meaning with the inference being, I'm paying for your bills, or, for your rent.
You're talking about a voice note that came out.
Correct. Yes, the voice note where he had said, I'm on my job, you need to get on yours. The implication being, I pay your bills, therefore you need to do what you need to do to make me happy, which includes these freak-offs. So it's one of those things where she kept talking about how she was a single mom. She didn't know where she and her son were going to be able to go. And, from that perspective, she felt coerced because she was either going to be out on the street or she had to do these disgusting things. So there is definitely an argument to be made about the coercion aspect. Force is going to be a little bit harder from that standpoint, because I think for Cassie, the force is much stronger because obviously there was physical brutality. We saw the tape over and over again. And so definitely the force argument is stronger with Cassie. I don't think the force is as strong with Jane, but I think the coercion is definitely there. Fraud, I don't think there's much fraud there. I think it's mostly we're hanging our hat on coercion.
Remember, we're in the crux of her testimony. If you base it on the opening statement, there is violence to come. That's what I'm imagining we're going to get to. So again, it's a little bit, we're getting into this based on her 2 days of testimony or day and a half of testimony. We'll see where it goes. Here's the problem. There are many things that the defense may jump on. And to be clear, again, at the time of this recording, the defense hasn't even begun their cross-examination. So what were some of the weaker points in her testimony? Okay, a lot of her testimony was about how she did things to make her partner happy. That when she said she couldn't perform because she was on her period, she claims Combs accused her of lying, called her weird, but as far as I remember, I don't hear anything about her being forced to still go through with it. Like being thrown into a room and said, I don't care, have sex with this guy on your period. She talked about setting up some of these events. She talked about that she chose the workers. Again, she said it was to please Sean Combs, but apparently she had a role in who was selected. She wrote sexually explicit messages to sex workers and Combs. She claims to turn him on. That she was with him up until his arrest with a last hotel night in August of 2024, so just weeks before he was taken into custody. She claimed that he is still paying her rent and that the only thing she really enjoyed about the hotel nights was being with Sean. How she was essentially just putting on a good show for him, disconnecting when performing. Melba, is this enough? Is this enough to show a lack of consent, or does the jury need more? Did it feel like she was just getting upset that she wasn't getting a more alone time with him? Or is she testifying as a victim of sex trafficking? I know this is not the classic example of sex trafficking, but what do you think? Are those problems in her testimony?
Again, the key is going to be the prosecution is going to have to give the closing argument of life, okay? Because they really need to weave this together for the jury for them to have a better understanding. Because again, I think a lot of this would smack the average juror wrong. I mean, when you have Jane talking about how Diddy paid her rent and was giving her 10 grand a month just for expenses. And then she turns around and says that was not enough for her to be able to furnish her house and live in a comfortable manner, that she needed to go into debt and open 3 more credit cards. I think that aspect, I think it would put the jury off, especially if you have a jury of average New Yorkers who, working, trying to do everything they can to make ends meet and would love to have an extra 10 grand free and clear every single month to be able to, pay their bills, go on vacation or do something. So I think some of those aspects made her look like she wanted to be in the scene and she just didn't like the price that she had to pay. I think there's a definite argument to be for that by the defense.
Do you think it's a problem that she was with him up until last year and is now testifying against him? Because again, it's not like the classic sex trafficking case where, oh my gosh, someone was kidnapped, was shipped off for sex trafficking. Authorities rescue her. She testifies again. This is different.
Yeah. And again, it's really getting back to Dr. Hughes's testimony in terms of the complicated relationships, in terms of domestic violence relationships. The dynamics are so strange and are foreign to most of us, right? Because you're like, if somebody's forcing me to, or telling me I need to have sex with multiple men while I'm recovering from a yeast infection or a urinary tract infection, most people are thinking, the average person will be like, no, I'm not going to do that. You need to go somewhere else with that foolishness. So I think hearkening back to Dr. Hughes's testimony would be the best play for the prosecution to kind of explain why she even continued to sleep with him all the way or be in these situations all the way up until 2024.
Do you think Dr. Hughes will have to be recalled? There was a little bit of discussion this morning about whether that's a possibility. Again, she is a forensic psychologist who talks about the complicated relationship between a victim and an abuser and why they stay in touch and why they might behave in ways that look inconsistent with being abused, but there are different explanations for it. I'll give you an example. I was wondering, do you think Jane vocalized her lack of consent enough for legal purposes as opposed to, I hate to say it like this, but I wonder if this is how the defense is going to characterize it, a disgruntled girlfriend, right? She talked about giving subtle clues at times that she didn't want to do something. And when she did it feel like she was upset she didn't get alone time with him or she's being victimized? I'll give you an example. This is from the transcript. Do you have an estimate of about how many times you told Sean that you did not want to keep having these hotel nights? I don't have an estimate, but I know I definitely wasted in a sense of mostly text messages. Jane, between May 2021 and October 2023, did you try to bring this up with Sean over the phone and in person? Yes. Once or more than once? More than once. And each time, did he react essentially the same way? How did he react? Just upset, defensive, belittling, dismissive? Melba, again, do you think Dr. Dawn Hughes has to be recalled to explain this? And did Jane, in your opinion, based on the testimony so far, did she vocalize her lack of consent enough to put Sean Combs on notice and to make it clear that he was sex trafficking her or allegedly sex trafficking her?
So to answer the second question first, I think she vocalized her displeasure and lack of consent enough. Because I think it just felt like she said it 10 different ways from sunrise, whether it was a text message, whether it was phone calls, him ceasing to speak to her for like 3 weeks or something along those lines, after she said that, this is problematic, et cetera, et cetera. So his reactions to what she said made it clear that he heard her loud and clear and did not like what she had to say. So I think from a legal's perspective, yes, she had clearly said that I don't want to do this. Now, the fact that she kept doing it, separate discussion, but she always said that this was not something she wanted to do. This is not the relationship she wanted to have. Talking about the Pandora's box, like I feel like I opened Pandora's box and now this is the only basis of our relationship and there's nothing else. She made it clear this is not what she wanted to do. So I think that part is very clear. Now, in recalling Dr. Hughes, I'm on the fence. I almost feel like if I was a prosecutor, I would have waited to call Dr. Hughes, knowing the types of testimony that was to come, because of course you knew what order pretty much you were going to call the witnesses in. So if you knew you had multiple girlfriends who had similar experiences, then you kind of wait and have Dr. Hughes come and explain all of the behaviors in one fell swoop, rather than bringing her on to explain Cassie's behavior and then try to recall her for the narrow purpose and have to fight with the defense.
First of all, they had to get Cassie on the stand immediately because she was about to give birth.
Of course,
so they had to do that. I think there's something to say now the jury knows where Dr. Hughes is coming from in that mindset. Then you call Jane as opposed to after. They're already primed for it in a way. So I hear you, but I think, that's another way of looking at it. Look, I wonder also how granular the jury's going to be. And I don't know if this is even necessarily a question of whether Jane was credible or not, as opposed to maybe other witnesses who testified, because there were opportunities for her to make it sound much worse, to make it more of a clear-cut case of force or fraud or coercion, and she didn't. For example, she testified how she didn't really want to have sex with this guy that Combs brought over, who she claimed was sweaty and he smelled killed and how Combs seemingly tried to encourage it, and that Combs, ended up having sex with her as the guy was hovering over her, and then he excuses him and brings somebody else in. I mean, to really make it sound worse, and if she really was, what the defense maybe will say is, oh, she's only out to get Diddy, she could have said, oh, he forced me against my will to have sex with him. And that, I didn't quite get that. I mean, it's pretty disturbing to say the least. You're around the guy you don't want to be with and he's hovering over you. It doesn't take away from that. And you go back to something else that I wanted to mention as well. Whether manipulation and financial control are elements of sex trafficking, right? So when she complained about being used for sex, Combs apparently responded in a text that she was throwing sex in my face and saying, let's just be friends. She apparently responds, I don't throw sex in your face constantly, but these nights require everything out of me for 30, 40 hours straight. I figure on my birthday, you would switch it up on me. You're making me feel used right now, and now you're breaking up with me? And then about financial control, she claimed that Combs paid her rent, discouraged her from making her own money through OnlyFans. So, you're talking about financial control, alleged manipulation, and then allegedly controlled her appearance, including paying for her to get veneers because he didn't like her teeth, that he wanted her to get piercings, which apparently she did. She claims she actually developed an infection as a result of it. So the financial control, the alleged manipulation, the control of appearance, these are the opening paragraphs of the government's indictment. When they talk about how Combs engaged in a pattern of abusing women and forcing them into sex acts as part of racketeering, do you think that those are compelling aspects of her testimony?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, like I said, the elements are there. It's just a matter of getting past some of the distasteful aspects as well as some of the things that might be perturbing and feel counter to human nature, right? But it's all there. It's all textbook in terms of making sure that she had no way to escape, that she didn't have her own money stashed away or anything like that to be able to be like, you know what? No, I'm moving on. He's making sure to control all of that, which is classic domestic violence. And that's also factors into the whole coercion aspect, because again, if you don't have any other options and he's forcing you to do something you would want to do, there we are. So I think those aspects are going to be strong for the prosecution.
And, she texted him apparently complaining that she hadn't seen him alone outside of a hotel room or a hotel night. And Combs apparently responded, well, get over it, please. Look at the roof over your head and that pretty smile. I don't want to do anything if that's still an issue. So something to think about there. Okay, let's put sex trafficking to the side. Now I want to talk about racketeering. So for racketeering, it's essentially Combs allegedly operated a criminal enterprise using his business and his staff to commit crimes and cover them up in this systematic abuse of women that went on for years. And the prosecution needs to prove at least two underlying crimes: sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, possession and distribution of narcotics and controlled substances. Take your pick. Well, Melba, the assistants, the security, allegedly setting up hotel rooms, the travel, carrying cash, his former chief of staff, Christina Coram, helping with Jane's piercing. Has Jane's testimony about this, does it help with that element of racketeering?
I think it does. I think it does, because the drug use, because remember, she didn't get the drugs herself. It was always Diddy or his team that got her the drugs and all of that. So you've got the drug trafficking. And again, you've got all the aspects of moving around in order to do these hotel nights, which again lends itself to sex trafficking. So I think that she helps. Now, is she the linchpin in the prosecution's case in terms of proving racketeering? No. But she is one building block by, again, showing the depths to which Christina Coram was engaged in all of these acts, and in terms of orchestrating and managing and all of that, and her level of awareness, and how much Diddy's organization was involved in each of these aspects on a day-to-day basis, which again, is harder to argue that this is not racketeering because you're involving your company in your day-to-day personal life in this matter. It's not just, okay, yeah, I'm getting a flight for you and your girlfriend. It's, I'm getting a flight for sex workers to come to do a freak off. You can't tell me that they don't know what's going on, right? So clearly he's using his businesses, he's using his employees to be able to further these hotel nights, these freak offs and all of that. So again, I think you have it there. But at the end of the day, I think the prosecution already has RICO from Kid Cudi, from the blowing up of the car, because that's arson, and Capricorn Clark, because he held a gun to her head and told her she couldn't leave, which is armed kidnapping. So everything else to me at this juncture is gravy.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, I think the more the better, right? The more the better that they sell. They
love gravy.
Give the jury options, right? Give the jury options for predicate crimes. But let's talk about that. So in terms of the underlying predicate crimes, we already discussed sex trafficking, put that to the side. But here's one. Jane testified that these hotel nights were like work. Is that forced labor or no? Because she's not necessarily an employee.
She's not an employee, yeah. So I don't think it's forced labor. I think you get forced labor.
I thought it might have been a stretch.
Capricorn Clark and
David James.
Right. You remember when one of the security guards told him, you know what rhymes with tired? Fired. So
and Mia. So if you're saying this is his assistant that he allegedly sexually assaulted, I could see that might support forced labor. Okay, let me ask you this. Drug offenses. You need co-conspirators for racketeering conspiracy. So Jane testified how assistants would bring drugs and security would bring drugs. She testified that she carried drugs. She transported drugs for Combs from LA to Miami, that Christina Coram allegedly helped arrange this too. That's co-conspirators for the drug offenses, the underlying drug offenses for racketeering?
Absolutely. Without a question to me, because again, they knew what they were doing. They got the drugs, not for themselves, but at the behest of Diddy in some way, shape, or form, whether it was Diddy directly saying it or Diddy telling Christina and Christina going ahead and telling them to do it. But regardless, it came through the organization from the top. The order is get cocaine or get ecstasy or ketamine or whatever it is, because there's a freak off his hotel night, whatever the case may be. So that's done.
Let me wrap this up in conclusion with this, Melba. Let me ask you, in conclusion, after arguably problematic witnesses like Brianna Bangolan, whose story of getting dangled off a 17-story balcony had been really seemingly countered with digital evidence, travel receipts, her own problematic text messages. Mia, too, who claimed that she was sexually assaulted by Combs, but then wrote him these loving messages. And again, there's always another side. There's always a way to explain trauma and why people might stay in touch with the people who abuse them or write loving messages. There's always an alternative explanation. Not the cleanest case for the prosecution, not the cleanest witnesses for the prosecution. Having said all that, after they testified, as of right now, and there's more testimony to go, is Jane the best witness to call to prove their case?
I don't think she was the best, but the reality is when you're putting together a case of this magnitude and of this scale, you're going to have a mixed bag of witnesses. You're going to have some strong ones. You're going to have some amazing ones who are really going to bring the case home for you. And you're going to have some that might be a little bit of, again, they give you a little bit, but they not exactly the best. But the reality is, very rarely do you have a trial where your witnesses are a nun, a priest, and a rabbi, right? The reality is, it's people, and I've said this in closing arguments a bunch of times, like, great to bring the Pope in, right? But the Pope is generally not going to be a witness to certain types of things. It's going to be the people that are in the mix. And sometimes your best witness is a drug dealer. Sometimes your best witness is, a sex worker, whatever the case may be, just because you don't particularly like them, the way they live their life, or whatever the case may be, does not mean they're not telling the truth, does not mean they're not credible witnesses. So you got to work with the hand you're dealt, and I think the prosecution is doing the best they can with what they have. I will say one thing, though, in terms of the Brianna testimony, because I came away at the end of her testimony like, the defense did a really great job on cross, but when they brought that expert in that brought up the text message that was a deleted text message from Cassie in real time saying, hey, something horrible happened. I didn't actually see it, but I think he dangled somebody off the balcony. I got to get away. I think that actually rehabilitated Brianna's testimony to an extent. So there's also...
We could have a separate conversation because they said that the metadata from the photos of her injuries indicated those photos were taken before the attack, that Combs was not in LA when this was going on. Again, what did Cassie see or hear versus, actually seeing or hearing herself? You could also make the argument, since they're not the cleanest of witnesses, it shows their credibility. Like I said, if they really wanted to get Combs, make it sound worse. I don't know, complicated situation. Melba Pearson, great seeing you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.